Hey guys, in this podcast we talk about different health topics. As we are not qualified medical experts, we would ask for you to consult your doctor before trying any of the things suggested in this podcast. Furthermore, we talk about third-party views in this podcast. Please know that we have no intention of misrepresenting them, and we apologize in advance if we do so. Thanks. Hey guys, welcome to another Contemplation Hypothezation podcast. Today, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about economic fallacies.
Okay, what does that mean?
So a fallacy is basically something that sounds logical but is missing something. So It's stuff that most people in general believe to be true, but it's missing something, and as a result of it missing something, there's unforeseen consequences that result if we believe these fallacies.
Gotcha. So if you're smarter and you can predict what these fallacies are ahead of time, you can save yourself a lot of money and just a lot of crisis.
I also want to do a podcast eventually on logical fallacies and stuff. Gotcha. But today our focus is economic fallacies. So just like a little background on economics. Economics is the study of transactions between people. What you need to understand about economics that makes it very different from things like philosophy and other things that we talked about is that its scientific method does not work for economics. So in science, when we have a theory, we hypothesize, we control variables, and we just determine what changes happen. We come up with a test to test our hypothesis. We can't do that in economics because we just can't control variables. So let's say the oil in China, we want to understand how the supply affects the demand. We can't control the demand and supply and then see the results. We have to theorize, and very much like I talked about in Whether It's Reasonable to Believe in God, we have to use things called inferences. Gotcha. And so we make a lot of inferences and we make a lot of theories in economics.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I actually want to start out with sort of a quote that I have right here that I think really illustrates sort of the idea of fallacies. So some things are true because they are demonstrably true. Sorry. Others appear true because they are asserted repeatedly. And that's the case with these fallacies. Okay. So let's jump right into the fallacies.
Gotcha.
First economic fallacy is a zero-sum fallacy. It's the fallacy that in a free market economy, our interactions with each other are zero-sum gains. And what that means is that one person benefits while another person is hurt by a transaction.
Okay.
So it's the idea that the rich become richer, the poor become poorer.
Yeah.
But what you have to realize is that it's not like that in a free market economy because we have voluntary choice in our decisions.
Okay. All right.
With involuntary choice comes zero sum.
Okay.
So if you don't have a choice, then it's only good for one person, it hurts the other person. But if you do have a choice, then so you go to the store, you can make the decision. You can say, I can give my money away to buy this product.
Right.
This money is going to go towards them, and it's a mutually beneficial transaction. So the important thing is that both sides benefit from the transaction, and that's the way transactions are when they are voluntary.
Okay.
So now an argument that a lot of people make, of course, is that people are not very rational.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole psychology.
Yeah.
And
so they say, we give people this voluntary power to choose whether something's good for them, but they don't know that it's whether what they're buying is actually good for them or not.
Okay, gotcha.
But what the important thing to realize is that who then is capable of making the rational decision of what this person should do with their money. Yeah. So people say people shouldn't make individual decisions. Like government should make those decisions for them because they have smart people. But the thing is that when you become an elected official, nothing changes. You're still human, and those irrational qualities are still part of you. So to say that because someone's a politician, they're better at making those decisions for you is to fall victim to the same fallacy.
But let me ask you this. I mean, a lot of people say not necessarily a politician, but like an investor or somebody who knows what they're doing. That's the quote they probably use all the time. Don't they have knowledge that contributes to a different decision that they might make?
Yes. Okay, so the quick answer is yes. So someone outside can maybe make, you hire an investor to manage your stock. They can make objective decisions for you.
That's the whole purpose why you hire an investor.
Yeah. So the important thing to note here is how close the person is to you proximity-wise, and how well you are able to assess whether your money is going towards a good cause.
Okay.
So let's say you hire a stock investor. You can evaluate his decisions and determine whether you agree that they're good or not. But that's why local government is far superior to federal government. We're giving our money to the local government, and we can know that our money is going towards a use that is important.
Right, that's the proximity factor.
The proximity, but when we're giving our money to the federal government, it's hard to determine that.
Yeah, and this stretches back, when there was kings, they just gave orders, and they didn't know what was hundreds of miles away. And so they gave sometimes irrational orders because even though maybe they were pretty smart, but the problem was they weren't there to physically see the situation.
Right. And that's why you've had politicians over the years devolve programs to the state level, because at the state level, when stuff is close, then someone can decide for themselves whether their money is better, whether their decisions and their money is better off in someone else's hands.
So and this applies to companies too, right? Like if you had Apple, you wouldn't want Steve Jobs necessarily deciding everything.
Yeah.
You'd want actually the local
managers just making decisions in those local branches and stuff.
Right.
So I actually meant to get to this before I got into fallacies, but in economics, there are two main branches of economic policy that affect our political system today. The first is Keynesian economics, and the second is the Austrian school of economics, which was founded by Hayek.
Okay.
Keynesian economic policy is this idea that stimulus packages, government spending, push the economy forward. Austrian economic policies is that the free market, capitalism, and government intervention is ultimately bad for the economy. So I'm going to go back to those when I talk about these different economic things.
Yeah.
But why don't we jump right into an example of the zero-sum policy, or the zero-sum fallacy. So like one of the most famous examples of the zero-sum fallacy is price controls on rent.
Okay.
So a lot of people think, like, let me explain to you the situation, and I'm sure you'll agree. So, like, if there's a city and there's a lot of people that need apartments, but they can't afford apartments at the time,
right?
Then doesn't it make sense to, set a limit on how much a landlord is allowed to charge? That way more people can get apartments and more people can fill. Well, just think very serious level.
Yes, but I mean, if you set it too low, then the landlord can't make any money from it.
Right. And so, but from the first glance, it sounds good. And that's one of the things about economic fallacies. Like I said before, they sound good, but they're missing the whole picture.
Right.
So it sounds good. Like, okay, we force landlords to charge a certain price, so then more people can get apartments at lower level prices.
Right.
This idea has been tested numerous times in different civilizations, in different countries around the world, and it always fails. So let me go over why it fails.
Okay.
So first off, the government is breaking this voluntary action thing.
Right. They're saying no matter what you do, this is the limit how much you can charge. Yeah.
So the first consequence. Well, let me first talk about who benefits, the benefactors of this.
Yeah.
So the people who currently own an apartment shortly benefit because their costs go down.
Right, exactly.
A lot of times with these economic fallacies, a group will benefit. And those are the groups that the politicians point to and they say, hey, look, these guys are benefiting. But we're not looking at the whole picture.
Right.
So anyway, so at first, you're going to have apartment holders who own apartments benefit because their rent goes down. But the first consequence is that the builders are less inclined to build more buildings because they are making a smaller profit on the places they build because landlords are making a smaller profit.
Right.
So when landlords are making a smaller profit, it then causes the people who build these buildings to make a smaller profit. And first off, what we're going to see is a decline in the number of new buildings created.
Okay, gotcha. So basically what you're saying is that it's more of a chain effect. At first it sounds great, but then later on it actually destroys the economy because it hurts people downchain or downstream of what this rule has caused.
Right.
And I think another common scenario is like a casino. Sometimes like a casino might be like installed into like a new city to attract more investors or to attract more people. But what ends up happening is the whole town's money is extracted by this casino to some billionaire, halfway around the world. And so suddenly this town actually is getting sucked out of money by this casino.
Yeah.
And so it appears good at first. It'll bring attractors there, but it ends up...
And the important thing to recognize about what he's saying as it appears good at first is that is how politicians sell these policies.
Yeah.
Is because they can convince you on that first thing.
And this is like a common psychological factor too. I mean, a lot of things are like, well, let me just watch one more episode. At first it feels great, and then the consequences are much worse. So a lot of things, and this is just a common human psych factor.
Yeah.
We always want to give into something that's easy at first, though, and we can't appreciate how much worse it will make our lives and why it's actually not worth it.
Yeah. And that's a sort of a survival thing because we don't tend to think long term, we tend to think short term.
Yeah.
So back to like the consequences that happen from this price controls of rent. So first off, less buildings are being built.
Right.
This has been seen in like every situation where price controls have been set on rent. Secondly, what happens is that because the prices are so cheap, there becomes a larger population of people seeking out apartments.
Yes.
So what you have happen is that you have these fewer apartment buildings that have lists of people who want an apartment there because they want that cheap price, which they have to get.
Right.
And so what happens is the supply is very limited, but that cannot meet the demands. And normally when the supply is limited, then we increase the price so that demand balances out. That's a mechanism of the market.
Right.
So what happens then is that because there's a list of people who want to move in, the landlord has less incentive to do maintenance on the place because it doesn't matter. They don't have to make their place attractive. They don't have to have like the top this, the top that, because it doesn't matter because
they have
no matter how much they spend, it's just money they lose because they're going to make that when the new people come in.
So basically what you're saying is when you undermine the ability to I actually have competition, really, that destroys the economy, essentially. Right. So the whole point is that you don't want set prices. You want a free market economy.
Because the natural mechanisms of the economy balance each other out.
Right.
When supply... Well, like the reason why when supply gets low, we have limited resource. When supply gets low, we don't want those resources to just completely non-exist. So we increase the prices so fewer of them are sold, and so demand goes down.
So another thing too, though, is you're saying is that though having like set prices seem good at first, but and that's
deceptive,
why that's why this is so important. Like,
you
might say, well, of course the free market economy is good. Everyone thinks that, but the problem is that no one actually does that because it's harder to do it at first.
Right.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that politicians are able to sell these ideas because people don't look beyond step one.
Right.
They don't see all
the
these.
Politician's goal is next election. I just need to get elected.
Right.
I don't care what will happen 5, 10, 20 years from now. I mean, that's beyond me. All I care about is votes for the next election.
Actually, that's a great point. And I wanted to bring that up because we did mention this in our last podcast, but the incentive up for politicians is to be reelected. And when you take public office, you're expected to do something, even though oftentimes government involvement in things just makes things worse. People would rather see you do something and fail than not do anything at all and have everything be fine.
Yeah.
So a politician is constantly seeking to do stuff that gets them reelected. And a perfect example of the consequence that comes from this is the fact that like 1 out of every like 8 bridges is not sturdy enough for the type of load it's taking on a daily basis.
Right.
It's because a politician doesn't get any glamour out of
repairing the bridge.
Yeah. They want to do stuff that gets them results. And this will be a general theme in this conversation because I'll talk about how a politician can make this look good, especially when we get to the composition fallacy.
And we're not like trying to slam politicians here because honestly, you might do the same thing if you were in their shoes. It's not like every politician is evil and every lawyer is evil. It's just that when you're in their shoes, when you're in their position, that actually is the best thing to do for you. And that's like a common theme throughout humanity. So what was another economic fallacy?
Yeah, so let's jump into another one. This one is probably the most famous fallacy of all the fallacies. It's called the broken window fallacy.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Okay, so I want to give like a little scenario that explains it. I'm not going to say it verbatim because I don't know it verbatim, but basically there's a scenario. So there's a village and there's a man who owns a store. Okay. And a kid comes by, picks up a brick, and throws it through the window.
Okay.
And breaks his window and stuff.
Okay.
Now look at the economic growth that comes from this activity. Okay. So he breaks the window. Now the store owner has to spend his money to fix the window, and then that money goes to the window maker or the window repairman.
Yeah.
Then he gets that money, and then he's able to spend that money maybe to buy a new pair of shoes or something. And then that money exchanges, and this chain happens. So at first glance, it looks like throwing this brick through this window is stimulating the economy. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now this brings up one of the most important aspects of economics, and this is unseen economic factors.
Okay.
So what you don't see in this situation is that, let's say the store owner was going to buy a suit, but now his window's broken, so he can't buy that suit,
and he has to buy it. So
the net gain on this is zero. Actually, you could argue it's negative.
It's negative actually because the window could have been perfectly fine, and he would have benefited from getting the suit, and so would the suit maker.
Right.
But then you might say, well, what about the window maker? Like, wouldn't that put him out of business? But the thing is that if you didn't need a window maker in the first place, that window maker could be doing something else more productive.
Right. And that's another thing we'll see, though, is that oftentimes in economics, things will hurt a few, but the net gain will be more. And the net gain is what's important at this point. So as we can see, there's no net gain in this situation because the guy who owns the shop would have spent the money elsewhere.
Right.
So like sort of a modern day example of it is cash for clunkers, which was a policy that, a recent policy, like where they took your car and destroyed it. So then you go out and buy a new car.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And basically, this is just a broken window fallacy, a modern day example. It's always going on. But, destroying the value of a car to then buy a new car.
Would you get money for a destroyed car?
You do get money for a destroyed car.
And that incentivizes you to get a new car.
But it doesn't actually stimulate any growth.
Right.
In fact, it might be negative.
Yeah, right. So one thing I just want to talk about too is the theme of wealth and efficiency. So we talked about this on our very first podcast, I think. But the whole point is that, like, when you have technology or anything that requires human labor, it's expensive. And if you can reduce the amount of people needed to do that certain task, those extra people that are no longer needed can do something else to stimulate the economy. And that's a common theme, and that's what really wealth refers to. And
yes, okay, so that's a great point I want to bring up, is that, so like in modern politics and stuff, there's all this pressure to create jobs. Okay, but creating jobs is not what our objective is in the economy. So like I could go outside and buy, let's say I rent a backhoe, and I could dig a giant hole.
Yeah.
Okay, just a
it would
giant
take you
hole.
all day though.
All day I dig a giant hole. And then I go find 50 people, and I'm like, hey, you guys fill this back up, I'll pay you. Yeah. There's absolutely nothing of value that comes from this transaction.
Right, exactly.
It's nothing. Even if I have tons of money to give away, I'm just exchanging money. There's no net gain at all.
Yeah.
And so this is often what, like during the New Deal, you saw projects like this where the government would just make up jobs that weren't needed. And the thing is that when we do that, we're actually hurting the economy because nothing of value is coming out of time. Right. But that time could be used for something else of value.
So like this kind of like a real example of this is probably like accidents, like car accidents. Now I'm not saying we shouldn't have rescue people in emergency rooms. We clearly need them, but a car accident is really just a toll on the economy because you have to pay for repairing the car, pay for the doctors to heal, for the people, the
this is a great
ambulance
example
people.
of a broken window.
Exactly. You have all these people involved, and it's very expensive because it's an emergency to get you back to where you were, literally on the road. Okay. Yeah. And I'm not saying we should definitely have these people because accidents do happen accidentally, but a lot of accidents can be prevented, and if they were prevented, it would actually boost the economy enormously.
Right. And so that's a great point. So like at first look, you say like car crash. Okay, first it's stimulating our health, economic areas. It's stimulating like the police departments, fire departments, everyone who's involved is like making money. But it's the same problem that broken window fallacy has. Is that person who was in that car crash had money that they would have used elsewhere.
Right. And so like one thing, I'm a technology guru, so I apologize for this. I always say this all the time, but basically the opposite of this, of actually creating, like liberating people from doing jobs, is technology. Like when a computer program can do like basic, like when you go to the airport terminal and you have to sign in.
You're always getting ahead of me.
Yeah.
This is coming up.
Sorry, yeah, but basically, yeah. So like when you have that computer doing it, people are like, oh, they're taking away jobs from people. But the thing is, look at this. This computer can now check out groceries from Kroger for you. They can sign you in at the airport. They can actually farm for you. So, I mean, all these things, it goes on and on. But the point is that you need dramatically less people to get the job done. And all of a sudden, all these people who are jobless are actually free to do more things. They can contribute more to like the art sector of the economy, or things that computers simply can't do, like human interaction. And so actually you might say like, well, technology is hurting us, it's taking our jobs. In the long run though, for overall the economy, it's actually helping us. If you look at the GDP per capita of every person worldwide, it has exponentially increased. So it's exponentially increased, but there's even an exponential to the rate of increased for that. So it's ridiculous. And that is continuing. We're like in hyper mode right now.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought this up. This is a fallacy I was going to bring up, and it's called the technology fallacy. And just a little bit more background on it is basically the fear is that when technology comes out, that people will lose their jobs because of it, and that won't be good for people. Now, this is true, actually. It will hurt people. So let's take an example. Like you work at Kroger's and you have a job as a clerk. Now Kroger's puts in these machines that do that for you, like the self-checkout machines. You lose your job. So, okay, you think to yourself, this is terrible and stuff.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing, though, is that we're seeing a small consequence for a net gain in the whole economy.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's going to be some people who are hurt by technology at first. But what happens is then those people who are hurt will then get jobs in another area and use their time better than it can be used. And the common example I always use is, I don't know why I have this obsession with digging holes, but, okay, so let's say if technology is not good, why don't we just do away with the backhoe? You know, instead of having a backhoe now, let's just have people shovel.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so like 50 people lost their jobs to the backhoe.
Right.
But is that bad for the economy? No. Those people now are off doing better jobs that are more productive, and they create more things. Technology actually takes the supply and demand line and lifts it up a whole level.
Yeah, if you look at, here's another example. If you look at the 1900s, you ask, what were people doing back then? 60% of the people employed were farming. 60%. Today, it's less than 2%. Okay?
Yeah.
So you might ask yourself, now I want you to imagine a world where everyone is still farming. Nothing would get done.
Yeah.
Forget having a cell phone or, you know, like an extravagant building that's built, you know, like per person. I mean, there's no way that would ever happen. And I mean, you can kind of forget like, you know, the entertainment system too, like TV, all that stuff. We just wouldn't have the number of people available to get something like that done.
Had not been for technology making jobs easier and allowing us to do other stuff.
Right.
So the big thing you have to get over, you just need to get over the short-term consequences. Yeah. And this is why you have politicians and you have individuals who protest, and you know they're very anti-technology and stuff because they were hurt by it.
Yeah.
Which is reasonable. Okay, so you were hurt by it, but overall the net benefit of the economy is, like he said, exponential. Like everything's growing.
Yeah, and one thing we should definitely comment on is the per capita for just people who don't know. Per capita just means like per person. Like, you know, in the world there's like 7 billion people, so that'd be per capita. So I'm saying per person we have this amount of GDP. You want to explain GDP?
Gross domestic product. Yeah. So it's just basically a measure of how cash moves between people.
Right. You can just think of it as the amount of money you have, pretty much, or how much goods you have. And what I'm saying is that the GDP, the gross domestic product per person, is exponentially increasing. So that we have thousands of times more than you had just 200 years ago.
And you should point out too, like this is kind of falls back into what I was talking about before. Like the objective should not be creating new jobs. The objective should be creating more product, more GDP
per person.
Yeah. So more things, because jobs doesn't do anything to the economy unless more products and more value is being created.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go right back to the broken window fallacy and just finish up on that real quick.
Yeah.
Just a couple counter arguments to the broken window fallacy. I just want to discuss those. So actually, I'm trying to tell me they are, but so one counter argument is like, let's say that the store owner's money was all in savings and he wasn't spending any of it. Okay. It was just all in savings. It wasn't going anywhere. So when that window was broken, he threw his money out to someone. Now the fallacy of this though is this idea that what savings actually means.
Yeah.
So when someone saves their money, contrary to popular belief, they do not go out in their backyard with a shovel and dig another hole. They don't dig a hole and throw their money in that hole.
Right.
What savings and the way our system works is that people invest either in banks or they invest in the stock market.
Okay.
And this is mutually beneficial to both the banks and the person and to society at large.
Gotcha.
So the guy, okay, maybe he has all these savings, but that money is going to a bank, which then can loan his money out to a entrepreneur who can then start a company.
Right.
Or it's going to, maybe he owns stocks and he owns pieces of a company.
Right.
It's going to a company to help them further things. So this is another fallacy that you see with like this whole billionaires, like, you know, they just have tons of money and they're not spending it. They're not doing anything. All that money is going into investments and savings and helping other people. And their money is actually doing a lot for the world. So to think that
Yeah, it's just basically to think that, all this money's just sitting in a hole, it's not doing anything, it's just lost money. It's really not. It's actually being invested throughout the whole world. Now, one thing I wanted to comment on is how companies are run and how it's changing today. A lot of people who are like the CEOs of a company, you might actually wonder, like, what do they actually do? What do they do? And the question, and really the answer is they talk to investors a lot. Their goal is to convince an investor, the guy with all the cash in the bank, to get to invest money, to give us money, give our company money, and you will receive more money in return. And the reason why the CEO is doing this, and while a lot of business managers are doing this, is because they want more money, because they know if they get more money, they'll have more time to research, develop more products, and then their company will grow.
Yeah.
So it's a mutual benefit for everyone, the investor, the company. Now the problem is the company might go under, and then the investor loses his money because of that, and that's why it's such a competition to get investors to invest in your company. Now this is changing a lot, because to do that, you'd want to like speak the language of business. Everyone, you would go to business school. And I'm not trying to hurt your major or anything with this, but you go to business school because you want to learn the language of money, how you talk to an investor, everything from the party to talking to them, mannerisms. It's all an art. But now this is kind of changing. Like if you look at Google or a lot of tech companies, it's more of an engineer-based run company. They don't really, and they do talk to investors, but they say, here are the numbers, and this is what we're designing.
Yeah.
Either you're in or you're out. It's not like this formality. It's almost like it's not like this dance where you're trying to like win over the guy through these psychological advantages on your side. It's more of a clear cut. Here's our plan. We have this 20% time that allows our engineers to develop even better products. We're here to just develop products, and you can invest whether you'd like or not. What I'm trying to point out is that it's changing and it's more efficient. And that's really something to notice. That's I think going to change a lot of how business is conducted.
Yeah. And you actually brought a good segue in to and a fallacy I want to talk about. With you mentioned CEOs and stuff, and there's right now in America there's a lot of hate against CEOs because like the average worker in a company is making like this amount, and then the CEO is making a lot more, and they say it's not fair. The guy doesn't need to make that much. Well, the first thing to point out would be that a CEO's value to a company is far greater than the value of an individual worker. So a CEO has the capability of changing the value of the stock of a company by like hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that there was like one company where they got a new CEO. And instantly, the value of the company went up $100 million stock-wise. And so that's ultimately why they're being paid based on demand and like what they are capable of doing.
Right. And if someone is very good talking to these investors that we were talking about with the CEO, you want them on your side. And if they have a good CEO that they know, if people see like, hey, this company got this new CEO, this CEO can like really get investors. He can really attract investors. I'm going to invest in this company that's going to attract more investors.
Yeah, and so if I'm a company and I see like how effective the CEO is at his job, then I'm going to want to compete to get him. And that competition is what shoots the prices up. Now, let's say we did something like we limited the amount of money a CEO can make. First off, our best CEOs are going to leave this country because in other countries, they don't have limitations on how much a CEO is paid.
Yeah.
Secondly, they're going to have less incentive to be like far better because they're not going to get paid more.
Right.
And ultimately, no matter how people are constantly want more money, and there's no like you limit their money, they're just going to go elsewhere where they can get more.
Yeah. Now, Paul, I know you've prepared a lot, but one thing I think that'd be interesting to people is the psychology of money and how after a certain point it can actually become a depressing factor as opposed to an enriching factor.
Yeah. Well, this is a sort of psychological whatever, but
a psychological fallacy related to economics.
Yeah. It's very much related to economics. And this is more of a personal thing and not so much economic related, but it's sort of that. A lot of us like have this innate desire to have more money, and so why is that? A lot of it's evolutionary. Money is social status. We have more money, we have more social value, and so we developed this belief that having more money can make us happier and make us better people, and we kind of daydream about the potentials that money can do for us. And although I think it's okay to examine these things and stuff, I think that ultimately, my opinion on it is that money cannot make someone happy. If you look at the top celebrities who have tons of money without much work, you look at CEOs, the more money does not, you look at Eminem, he has these giant houses, more money doesn't actually make him a happier person.
Yeah. So I kind of have a modified belief of it. I kind of think money actually does make you happy until a certain point. And a lot of people debate, maybe it's $60,000 a year, maybe it's $200,000 a year, maybe it's $100,000 a year, whatever it is. There's some magical number out there. Maybe it changes from person to person. But the point is that, clearly, past the $1 million mark per year, it doesn't really matter how much money you're making.
Yeah.
And I actually think what happens is people become even greedier when they have $1 million per year. They're like, well, I want to get to $2 million. I want to eventually be on the Forbes billionaire list.
Yeah, I think one aspect of that that you're not seeing it necessarily is that it's not that that getting more money is making them want more. It's that the type of people who get a lot of money are people who inherently obsessed with getting money, and so as they get more, their hunger never.
Plus it also depends on who they are around. If I'm making $1 million a year, I'm not going to be hanging out with. Well, I'll still hang out with you, Paul. But but the point is that I'm going to be surrounded by other people who are probably making around the same amount of money and probably higher amounts.
Yeah.
And so
the value, the social value that comes from the money is no longer there,
right?
Because you don't have any more value because the people you're around are richer than you.
And this is a common thing that stems like from childhood. You know, if your neighbor has like more toys than you when you're a little kid, you're not happy. But suppose you were the guy with all the toys and everybody else didn't have as much as you did. You feel better generally about yourself. And if in college, same thing, like maybe a better GPA, you have better extracurriculars than most people you hang around, and you feel good. And the same thing with money here too. You know, I'm making $1 million, but you know, she's making $2 million. He has like 3. Like I kind of feel embarrassed actually. Like I'm uncomfortable being me. And anyways,
I think just one more thing on that topic. I talked about this study in the past and stuff, but there was a study where they studied lottery winners and paraplegics. And they found that after winning the lottery and accumulating a lot more money, people were a lot happier for 30 days. Really? But then after 30 days, they tended to return to the same level of happiness they had been prior to winning the lottery or prior to becoming a paraplegic. Obviously, the paraplegics were very upset for 30 days. But what that means is that money doesn't really have that much power in changing our overall happiness. It might make us happier at some point, but we tend to resort back to our habits.
And I think this really matters for career-driven people. I actually kind of find myself like that too. I feel like I'm always like, oh, what's next on the career ladder? Like, what am I going to do next? And I think at the end, you know, I got to say to myself, it doesn't matter really. I mean, you could have the best career in the world, you could have the most amount of money. It's still, the fact is that you're probably going to be the same level of happiness, you know?
Yeah. Well, and then the things that psychology shows affects your happiness are things like autonomy. Like, can you complete goals? Do you feel like you're in control of yourself? Or social relationships. And I think it's important to recognize that money is not just acquiring money that people want. It's the social value that money comes with.
Yeah, people are attracted
prestige.
to you.
But that also has very detrimental side effects. Like when you have a lot of money, you have a lot of people who, you know, treat you like you're like on a pedestal, and most people are very annoyed and irritated by that. And you have people who want your money, so they like try to do favors for you. They try to manipulate you in order to get some of your money. So the way people treat you changes, and I think that's one of the big reasons why really rich people become depressed.
Yeah, right.
But do you want to jump back into the fallacies real quick?
Definitely, yeah.
So another fallacy that is really common is the composition fallacy.
Okay.
So basically, the idea of this is that you take from Peter and give to Paul is like the common analogy that is used. Or like if you're at a baseball game, it might make sense for you to stand up so you can see better. But if everybody's standing up, then no one can see.
Right. Yeah.
And the idea is that what's true for one is not true for all.
Okay. All right. Can you give us an example, maybe?
Yeah. So let me think of something real quick. So like let's take an example. I'm not going to say that this is a perfect example or anything, but in the last election, a big example was a big thing that was used was the saving of the car industry.
Okay.
Like Obama claimed that his policies saved the car industry from going bankrupt and stuff, and that was very good for the economy. Now, it may very well be the case, but this is one that is he saving the company at cost to the economy at whole? And so what politicians often do, and what a big part of politicians' agenda is that they can point to the benefactors of a policy but ignore the unforeseen things. Like we talked about in the broken window fallacy, how we don't see what that guy would have bought anyway.
Right.
The politician can say like, oh, look, these people are much better off. My policy was awesome.
Yeah.
But you don't see that in general, the economy was hurt by it.
Right.
And there wasn't net gain. So the Obama policy could very well have helped the auto industry, but maybe it hurt from other industries. And oftentimes when politicians get involved in things, they help one group at the cost of another group. And the important thing to realize is that this is a zero-sum game.
Gotcha.
And a non-zero-sum game means that the actions are
beneficial,
voluntary, and mutually beneficial between the parties.
Right.
But when the government gets involved, actions become involuntary. You have to do this. You have to do that. And so consequently, one group benefits while another group hurts.
Okay, well, let me counter you just for a second.
Sure.
I agree with you, but devil's advocate here. You know, especially with cars, one thing that government policies are enforcing is miles per gallon with the whole greenhouse gas concern. Because the car companies don't financially hurt from greenhouse gases, right?
Yeah.
But the government is saying, you know, you have to get 30 miles per gallon, or I think it's like 36 by 2018 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So the whole point is, what do you think about that? I mean, they're clearly enforcing the limit, but it's for a different reason. It's for the overall good.
Okay, that's a great point. And I think anyone who's attacking this argument should bring up this point. So, first off, you need to understand a concept called externalities.
Okay.
Most free market economists, Austrian economic individuals who believe in that philosophy of economics, believe that the government should get involved in some aspects of the economy, and the ones that they should get involved with are externalities. So an example of an externality is like, let's say that there's a company that makes tons of money, but while they're making tons of money, they are like destroying a river. They're polluting this river like crazy, but the company has no incentive to fix the river because no one lives by the river. You know, the future consequences from the destruction of the river don't affect the company, so the company can continue to make profit while disregarding the environment.
Right.
So most economists believe that it is beneficial for the government to step in and make requirements on things like, you know,
the environment or something.
So this actually brings into another topic I want to discuss. So out in the world, there are different people who believe, like, one, laissez-faire policies.
Can you explain that real quick?
Which is no government intervention at all in the economy. And then there's some people who say, well, there should be some. Like, okay, we're okay. Like, communist is too much. Right. Socialism is too much. But free market is too little. And we should just throw a little bit in when we can help.
Right.
Okay, so the thing that you have to remember about this is that the purpose of the government, as created by the Constitution, was to protect individual freedom, essentially, to protect the interests of individuals. So the government is created as a mechanism to help individuals.
Yeah.
Right. And so the goal of the government is to help. But so people use the government. If they can use it to help the economy, that's good. But what you have to step back and say is, are the people using the government, or is the government using the people?
Okay.
And in a lot of cases, when you talk about we talked about the incentives of politicians. Politicians' incentives are mainly get reelected, not necessarily to do what's in the best interest of you. And so our government has gotten so big that a lot of its involvement in the economy has more political reasons than reasons for the people of America.
Okay.
And so oftentimes when the government does get involved, there's consequences. So if the government does say, like, we need this requirement of miles per gallon, there's going to be hidden consequences from that. People are going to be hurt by that. Companies are going to be hurt. But you have to gauge whether that's worth it or not.
Right. Yeah.
But oftentimes, like when a bill is passed, there's things in the bill that are being passed where that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Politicians play this whole game of chess.
Right. Yeah. That's a whole other topic. But so you're saying that is it, you have to ask the question: Is
your money going towards something that you want it to?
Yeah.
And that's again why local government's much better, because you can know where your money's going. But when we throw money to politicians and to this powerful government, our money can be going all over the place.
Yeah. Right.
And so like something like a stimulus package. Is it good for the government to spend money on the economy? Like, doesn't that stimulate it? Of course. Like, the government spending money stimulates the economy. Anytime money is spent and things are being bought, that's good. But the question you have to ask yourself is, where does the government get the money from?
Yeah.
The government gets the money from taxing you. So essentially, the politicians are saying that it's better for them to determine where your money should go than for you individually to sell it. Because had they not taxed that money from you, then people probably would have spent that money themselves.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and also another thing is like this comes back to earlier what we were saying, like saving is kind of like restricting the economy if everyone's saving. But I think there's a lot of studies that show that during a time of depression, a lot of people just save like mad. That is like the major thing. They don't spend anything, they save. And the thing is that actually that shuts down the economy, because when everyone's saving, yes, it might be in the bank, and the bank might be loaning out money, but even the banks...
Can I point something out too?
Yeah.
Composition fallacy. So what's good for one person isn't necessarily good for all. So one person saves, it's good. Everybody saves, nothing's going in the economy.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is that it actually flips though. Like when everyone is doing well in the economy, people do save, but it's not nearly to the degree that they were saving. The percentage, like they might save, let's say 20% of their income normally, but like when a depression hits, they're actually like 40%. Like I don't,
Yeah. And also realize too though that like savings is good. It's okay. Like during a depression, we save, and that's one of the mechanisms to get out of the depression.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a squirrel and acorns. Honestly, it's the same thing.
Exactly, and that's a good point. Like you can always break stuff down into smaller examples.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I think another important thing that I want to just talk about too was just the psychology of buying and saving, depending on how the economy itself is doing. That's a really important factor, and because of that, it can either like the economy can explode or it can actually like crash. Just because of all these factors that happen. Like if one person does this, that chains onto this, and that even can affect families too. It's shown across the board when the economy does very well, when you have a lot of GDP per capita or a lot of money per person, the families actually tend to be smaller. Now you might ask yourself, like you would think it might be the opposite, right? Yeah. You would think if you had more money, you could afford more kids, so you would maybe be relaxed enough to have more kids. But the thing is that the more career-driven you are, honestly, it breaks down to less time you really have for a kid. Like when you look at like a lot of developed families or a lot of families who are wealthy, you'll find that just in general they might have like a single child, or they might have maybe two children. And if you look at poor
people, they have a lot more.
They have many more children. Yeah.
And actually, a common just kind of as a side note, a common like valuation of GDP is household per capita, and this is often used by politicians to carry a point across, because people don't see the difference between per capita and household per capita. So they'll compare the rich to the poor, but people don't fill in the blanks at what these metrics actually are. So that's an important thing. I really recommend everyone taking macroeconomics, because you realize how these things like GDP and stuff are actually calculated, and then you realize how easily statistics can be manipulated so that something appears to be a way that's really not. And politicians do this all the time.
Yeah. So what Paul is saying is, if you do it per household, if you're richer, you have less people. So your per household is actually more per person. But if you were poorer, you have more people per household. So it actually means less money per person.
Right.
So if you looked at, like, you're saying, well, these poorer factions are doing great. Look how much money we have per household. It's very misleading, because the people who are poor actually have more people, more children in that house. So that's what, just to break
Exactly. Yeah, no, that was
saying.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to jump into another fallacy.
Yeah, I think we got time for one more.
Okay. Oh, man.
Or maybe two more.
Actually,
You want to make it quick, yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk about is the cause of the Great Depression and the most recent recession.
Yeah.
So most everybody, if you would ask, what caused the Great Depression? What caused the most recent recession? They say, like, Wall Street greed, the failure of the free market, things like that. Now, I heard a great quote recently. Like, a lot of people attribute the recent recession to Wall Street greed. And I heard a quote that said, attributing Wall Street greed to the recession is like attributing gravity to why a plane crashed. Because our capitalist system runs on... greed. That's like the whole point.
Right.
So why is it, though, that the real reasons for these events doesn't come out? Why does everyone blame the free market? Well, there's one reason that explains it all. Because there's no spokespeople for the free market, but there's many spokespeople for the government.
Yeah.
So when
companies.
companies. So like when an event like this happens, the government does a lot of talking to get themselves out of the situation. So like look at the Great Depression, and almost every economist, it's not even debated, it's not even controversial, associate the Great Depression with the failure of the Federal Reserve to deflate the money. And that's what ultimately caused the Great Depression.
Just for our listeners, do you mind explaining that a little bit more?
This is actually would be a very complicated topic to go into, but
just deflation, like that. Let's just
like what's actually happening. Okay, so basically, the Federal Reserve has the power to manipulate the money supply. So if they want more money in the economy, then they buy bonds. If they want less, then they sell bonds.
Okay.
I could have this wrong just because there's a lot I have to go through.
Okay.
And then they also control interest rates. This actually will get into what happened in the most recent recession with the interest rates being controlled.
Okay.
But basically, the research that a lot of economists have done have looked back and they said the Federal Reserve should have stepped in at this time and deflated the money supply. And to do that,
when you say
I think
deflate, what does that mean?
Okay, so inflation is when more money is in the economy, therefore each dollar has less value.
Right.
Deflation is when less money is in the economy, so each dollar has more value.
Right. So
they sell bonds to get money, and then there's less of it, and so that's essentially.
Yeah. So basically, like if you can always tell that the price of everything is always going up, and that's because we live in inflation. Inflation is something that we predict that's going to happen. Things will always cost more.
Yeah.
For the same product. But then deflation is the opposite. Your money is worth more. You can buy.
And part of the reason why inflation happens is because the Federal Reserve prints more money.
Yeah.
That's another way to cause inflation is to print money.
So you're adding more money to the economy.
Yeah. So basically,
but you're not increasing the wealth. The wealth is still the same, but the amount of money that represents the wealth is more.
And that's an interesting fallacy too. Is that where people think more money it means more value.
But
money is very subjective.
The wealth. I use the term wealth.
Wealth is much better. Yeah.
Wealth is what wealth we're saying remains constant, even though in our day and age, because of technology, it's increasing exponentially. But even if you print more money, like if you print double the amount of money in our economy today, the wealth would relatively remain the same, but the amount of dollars to wealth would double. So your money is still. So you still really haven't done anything. You're still having the same amount of wealth.
Exactly.
Sorry.
And so, so let's take the most recent recession. How did the most recent recession? We talked about the Great Depression. The most recent recession was caused by the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates too low on mortgages. Okay. So the government encouraged banks to give money to individuals at such a low interest rate and to give excessive loans when the people didn't have the money to back them.
Okay, so what that means, just to re-explain it, so if I'm going to buy a house, I have to take a loan out from the government.
Yeah.
And or from a bank. Then what ends up happening is people say, well, we just can't give you money. We have to see proof that you're going to make this money back and give it to us. But the government was lax on it shows that much proof, or they were very relaxed about it, not very strict about it. And so what eventually happened was no one could actually pay back the money that they borrowed because they actually couldn't in the first place.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that's happening. Okay, first off, when the government subsidizes or artificially lowers the interest rate, first off, people are more likely to buy houses. When people are more likely to buy houses, there's a greater demand for houses, which means that the supply lowers and the price of houses goes up.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about money that people don't have and the artificially high prices of houses, see what normally happens with banking and loaning is that the banker assesses the risk of the individual.
Right.
And risk is very important. Like when you go to the inner city and you go to a store in the inner city, oftentimes products cost more because the owner of the store has to evaluate the risk of being robbed or money bouncing back and not being real, things of that sort. And so bankers also have to assess the risk of that individual, which you discussed. And so what happens is slowly over time, or that happened pretty quickly, houses just started increasing more and more value. And people started thinking that the price of their house was how much money they had.
Yeah.
So you buy a house in San Francisco where the prices of houses are incredibly expensive, and you say, I'm rich, I can spend all the money I want to because this house is worth this much.
And my hope is that the price will continue to
go
grow.
Up. Yeah.
And so I can sell the house later and I would have made more money.
Yeah. But instead, because people didn't have the actual money to back it, the whole market popped.
So notice this is the same thing as like the inflation argument that we were talking about earlier. The wealth of the economy stayed the same, but people thought that all of a sudden
money.
something was increasing in like somehow, I don't know how, but this price of this object, the house in this case, is increasing.
Yeah.
But the wealth of the entire economy hasn't increased.
Yeah.
It has increased, but not nearly at the rate of the house.
Yeah.
Because it's always increasing. But the whole point is that it's just, for anybody, it should be a warning sign. If something is just magically increasing, there has to be a reason behind it. And the chances are that it's probably too good to be true.
Right.
Nothing is going to just increase just because it is. You have to find a very solid, concrete
And this
reason.
is why the Austrian school of economics actually predicted the market crash. Now, another thing you might say is like, okay, the housing bubble popped. Why did the whole economy fall apart? Why did the stock market crash? And the reason why is because the house industry makes up like 60% of all the stuff, because you have people who build appliances, people who build televisions. All of this stuff is very linked to the economy.
Every product that you use is probably in your house, maybe except your car. Yeah. And so if you don't have a house, you don't have a chance to buy the things that you would use in the house.
And so so the idea here is that it wasn't the free market or the Wall Street greed that caused it. What actually caused it was during the 1990s, during Bill Clinton's presidency, there was this push for the American dream where everybody should be allowed to purchase a home.
Yeah.
And so the government decided to step in and make interest rates low and pressure banks to offer mortgages to people who couldn't afford them. What resulted was a crash. But you don't hear the government being blamed because the government is good at throwing off the blame because the free market doesn't really have a spokesman.
But again, that's just because of how people talk. And we can go into the psychology of how people can persuade you when clearly they're wrong. That's we could do another podcast on that.
Yeah.
So, but the whole point is that we're not trying to necessarily blame. A lot of people think it's like one reason, and probably for the entire crash, it probably wasn't exactly just one reason.
Oh yeah, don't take it that we're saying that this is the only reason.
The only thing.
This is a core reason to why it happened.
There are all the time there are things going down and up in the economy, but they average out so that you don't really see anything happening.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, the economy is just doing the same as it did yesterday. But there's all this chaos going on. But what happened is it was kind of like the stars aligned, and you had this housing bubble crash. I mean, a lot of things went into this to make this downfall occur. And once the downfall starts, everything goes down. People get scared. They see the stock market.
When housing is 60% of the industry, and then
people
begin becoming scared, so they take their money out of the stock market, and the stock market crashes.
That is what actually really when people start to see the stock market just suddenly start to dip, immediately they're thinking, I have millions of dollars in this. I gotta sell. I gotta sell. And so that just completely collapses the economy because it doesn't even matter what caused that dip in the first place. It could be housing, it could be cars, it could be food. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The whole point is that the stock market's going down, and I'm going down with it. So that's the whole point.
So so a lot of modern economic theory talks like what we're dealing with today is like how do you come out of one of these recessions? So the Austrian school. I just want to finish on one thing. The Austrian school believes that government intervention is the problem. The Keynesians believe that government can solve the problem. So one of the arguments Keynesian made was the problem of monopolies. Like, as we all know, like during the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had these monopolies that were just destroying everything. The robber baron was evident. Now, first off, to assess these, you have to look at whether what they were doing was even legal. So a lot of these monopoly owners had ties with the government. They're paying off politicians in order to crush the competition and stay alive. So,
but that still exists today.
There's a whole illegal aspect of a monopoly. But what's really interesting about those times is that during those times, the life expectancy of an average person increased more than it's ever increased in the span of human life. So the increase of life expectancy is the best measure of an improvement in an economy.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that most people were doing like cheap labor and then you had these really rich guys, we were building a massive infrastructure. We were building that, and then we were also people were becoming healthier. People were living better lives and longer lives. So whether that time period was really so bad for the free market is very debatable. Right. On top of that, there's a lot of illegal activity going on between the government's involvement with these monopolies. Yeah. Now, of course, you have a natural monopoly, which is something that does need to be regulated by the government, but that's not really for today.
Yeah. So maybe we'll just quickly explain vertical and horizontal monopolies. So just really quick, just for vocabulary terms, vertical monopoly refers to everything down the chain line. So maybe the best example of this is like the shampoo that you buy. Okay, someone has to get the different fruits, the different oils, everything, the plastics in the bottle that you use for the shampoo. All of that is owned by the same company. So the same company extracts the plastic, makes the plastic containers, does the labeling, does the advertising, and at the same time collects the oil, collects the fruits, makes different chemicals, processes it all together, and makes the shampoo and stores it in the bottle. Okay, the entire company does all of that. That's a vertical monopoly because everything down the line was done by that company.
Right.
A horizontal, on the other hand, is a company that owns a variety of products in one area. So with shampoo again, this is like one company will own like Hertz shampoo. They'll own any like
Off-brand or
off-brand
Yeah.
of shampoo. They'll own like any Axe type, like Axe branded shampoo. They'll own it all, and it doesn't matter what shampoo you buy because you're still buying from that company.
Right. Another important thing to recognize about monopolies too is that monopolies are corporations often, and so what that means is that if the monopoly is selling, then people who own stock in that company will benefit from it. So it's not, we don't have situations where like one person is obtaining all the wealth and everyone else is being screwed.
Yeah, if you're investing in stock, yeah.
Actually, that brings us to a good one to end on. So in late politics, there's been this whole debate between like the gap between the rich and the poor. Like, is this a problem? So the first thing that needs to be recognized with this idea is that they're comparing yearly income. Now, what they don't tell you is that people can move from one group to the other, but it's not noticed. So, for example, like let's say that everybody in the top 1% went bankrupt, and then everybody in the bottom 1% became the top 1%. That would not be at all illustrated in the figures that they use to determine these gaps.
Right.
So basically, like if someone sells their house in San Francisco, they're going to have a huge increase in income that year, and that's going to go into these measures. So you can see why there's like a lot of problems with these measures to begin with, because they don't really accurately reflect. But what's interesting is like the bottom 20% moves to the top 20% every 8 years. We don't see that.
Yeah.
So just because you're in the bottom 20% doesn't mean that you're stuck there. It doesn't mean that any of these groups are permanent. And I think in 1995, the top 1%. Of the top 1%, none of them were in the not none of them, but very few of them remained in the top 1% 10 years later.
Wow, yeah.
So you have these shifts and stuff. So it's not really an accurate measure to determine. But plus, on top of that, the people who are the top 1% are paying a huge portion of our taxes. They're contributing a lot of value to the economy. Their savings are going towards investments and creating products. And ultimately, all of their accumulation of money has came from mutually beneficial transactions between people.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess that would kind of incite like an uproar about like, well, they have too much money still, and what about everybody who's poor and stuff. And I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, obviously there's disparity, but I think my personal belief is as long as you're going to have an economy, you will always have a gap between the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
But
what's important is how far the poor is moving up.
Yeah, in that entire gap, like in the 1500s was over here, but we've actually moved it up all the way over here. So the poorest of the poor now, we're much better off than the people of the richest 200 years ago. And that is going on today, and it's accelerating.
And that's why capitalism is the best. It's not, what we don't need to be concerned about is the gap. What we need to be concerned about is how poor are the poor in our country, and how is that changing over time.
Exactly. Instead of comparing how rich is this guy compared to this guy right now, analyze, all right, how is the middle class doing than it did 10 years ago? Has it increased or decreased? What's the GDP per capita, or what is their average life expectancy? These are solid numbers that you can't misconstrue. It doesn't matter how you put them. I mean, they're going to either show the data yes or no.
Yeah. And an interesting point too is like, let's say that you throw like John D. Rockefeller in with an average person in a room like 100 years ago. It's going to be obvious who the millionaire is in that room. But now, if let's say you have a giant seminar and there's like 8 billionaires in the room, you can't tell them apart because the wealth of everyone, the clothing that people wear,
your iPhone,
the devices you have are far greater than the gap between what people actually have has gone down tremendously to the point where you can't tell the difference between a billionaire and a millionaire billionaire and a normal person.
Yeah, billionaire, millionaire, thousandaire, it doesn't matter. The whole point is they'll all relatively look the the same. I mean, maybe their teeth will be different. That's the only thing I can think of. Eye surgery, maybe, so no glasses. I'm really
it'd be really hard to tell.
It'd be very hard to tell, and that's so powerful because that shows you that the very basic foundational technologies needed for everybody is here for everybody. That's such a profound statement. Just to have like a washing machine, water, food, access food. We're throwing away food. Like a computer screen, a computer, bathrooms, flush toilets. Anyone who's done the toilets,
I'm not sure if I have the statistics completely right. Someone can look this up to verify, but I think that it was like in the bottom 10% of our population, like 60% own a television with cable on it. 80% own like washing machines or something. And so that just shows you that even our poor are far richer than poor in other countries, and that's why capitalism is the best
and
system.
more importantly, the poor from 30 or 40 years ago. That's really what I want to mention.
Even in our own country.
Now you might want to be like, you might say something like, well, what about Africa, or what about like different poor sectors of the world? And the thing is that they're getting much better. There are thousands of projects being launched. There's like these different units that can clean water very efficiently. I think Google just launched a project where they're trying to get 3G to the rest of the world. All these things these technologies are enabling actually companies or countries to leapfrog. Instead of having like let's look at the US right
telephone,
now.
let's do telephone wires.
You have to wire the entire country with telephones, and it's expensive. But now, if you look at like somewhere in Africa, you look at these Google balloons. They're actually using balloons to get internet to everybody. You don't have to wire a single thing. You just get these very cheap balloons up there, and you're done. It's a fraction of the cost. If you want to build a subway using today's technology, it would cost more to do it in New York than it would in Nigeria. Because in New York, you have to tear everything up. You have to rebuild everything. It's a nightmare. It's an engineering nightmare. But a country that doesn't have that much can leapfrog past other nations because we can use the much more efficient technology that we have today and increasingly more efficient
Yeah.
to build and establish new cities.
Yeah.
So
Now, I do want to give you guys one example of the composition fallacy, since I didn't do a great one, because I finally thought of one since he was talking about cities. So a common thing that cities do is they build expensive housing with the idea that to attract rich people to live in the city. Now, what happens here is that, you know, rich people don't just spawn out of the ground. They don't just like come into existence. They move from other areas to the city. So if done effectively, you essentially move the rich people to the city, and then where the rich people left becomes slums.
Right.
And then the people in the city that are poor get kicked out. So it's just a moving process.
Yeah.
The fallacy is that it's somehow good to move people like that.
Yeah, and really it's probably just costing a lot.
Well, yeah, because you're taught you have to
build the city.
You have to destroy what's there. You have to build the city. You have to encourage the people to come. And then meanwhile, you're another
just
city's
laying
going to
rooms
slums.
to what was there before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, thanks guys for listening. We went extra long on this. We apologize, but thanks for getting. And if you have any questions, let us know, and we'll see you guys on the next podcast. So,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.